the resonant frequency of the Earth is 432 hertz, and all music was written and played in 432.
I just saw this one. I'm sure he's not going to play 5. I'm just going to play this real quick just to see. I didn't even know this was on here. Me and him have a shared chat room thing. You know what Planet X is, Nibiru? You know about that? It's the idea that there's a star system coming back towards our solar system that has extraterrestrials on it, who may have been the gods who made us, maybe.
I have not heard of this, but I'm very interested to give it a listen.
It's a little Phrygian. So the Sumerian text, which is the oldest, I don't even know why I'm bringing this up. I didn't plan to bring this up, but the Sumerian texts are the oldest known writing known to man, as far as scientists say. And many people have tried to translate it. Yeah. And it says that we were made, a bunch of interplanetary beings came here. They live on a place called Nibiru. And their solar system was failing. And they came here for gold because gold has this weird property. If you were to materialize it into the atmosphere, it gets rid of a bunch of weird gamma rays, and like their air system was failing, and they came here and bred with us in order to make people to mine the gold, because so they used apes and monkeys and partially their DNA in order to make a race that was halfway between, that had the strengths physically to mine things, and that's where we were created from. That's what it says, and they will come back around at some point, and it appears to be that that's approaching, allegedly. That's allegedly what was written in the text, and that's what we were created for. I'm surprised Bernie's into this because he usually is too scientific for such. This is pretty Phrygian for that, but I didn't even see that before. Anyway, this is a copyright strike video that's going to get deleted anyway. So this is a basically a to be edited for later, but we can see what cool stuff we can come up with in the meantime, right? Okay, so for people who are new to all this stuff, the alchemy, and it's mostly science, cold fusion, that's related to the podcast in general, I'm going to play the ultimate video for this. I mean, it's about 8 minutes, I think. It could be as much as 12. But we can talk through it too. Or if you want me to pause it, if you start talking, I will pause it. It's better if you go down there, if you see if other people come on, you can see where you can mute your camera or your microphone. It's better to mute it at all times that you're not speaking if a lot of other people come on.
Okay. All right. When you play the video, I'm gonna turn it off. That way.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to right now at all, because it sounds great right now.
Okay.
But you'll have to turn it back on before we'll be able to hear you, and it does screw you up sometimes.
Okay.
Okay. Is it right here? And this basically is when most people come onto Bernie's channel, everyone already knows what they're talking about, and this is only a small part of this, but it all is kind of the same thing. This is the idea that all these sacred sites on Earth were on these specific sites, which are called ley lines. But it'll be self-explanatory.
Okay, so today we're going to look at the study of earth grids and the enchantment of the landscape, with this idea that the earth has a geometrical nature and that the ancients understood this and would place sites all around the planet connected up into a massive geomantic system. One of my big inspirations was John Michel, and he really believed, as paraphrased here, that the earth was like a huge scientific instrument, and sites were placed across the landscape, connecting up energetically, astronomically, and in a scientific system to bring enchantment to the people, to the land, fertility to the animals, to the farms and the plant life, and so on. And he really saw it as a kind of spiritual science of the ancients. Then we get on to the more esoteric terms, ley lines or lays. It really is an alignment of 4 or more ancient sites, and this can be from any era, from the prehistoric right up to the Christian time, and it can be over any distance, but it has to be in a straight line. This was first coined by Alfred Watkins in the 1920s. An Earth circle is really an extension of a ley line, and it goes all the way around the planet, almost like cutting the Earth in two. And we'll see examples of these now. Ancient sites across the planet were lined up all around the planet. Archaeoastronomy is the alignment and orientation of sites to the sun, moon, and stars at certain times of year or certain cycles. Earth energy lines, these are yin and yang energies that emanate from the Earth, and they often move in random, sinuous, serpentine ways across the surface of the planet. Similar to these are telluric currents, and these are alternating electric and magnetic currents that are from the Earth's magnetic field. They strengthen at sunrise and weaken at dusk, and they often form into spirals, and these are often recorded and noted and dowsed at ancient sites. And Earth grids is really all of these in one system, looking at the Earth as a representation of these different geometries and different systems in one whole grid.
In medieval times in Europe, they did types of vibrational testing to find lines of energy in the Earth. And these Earth grid energies were classically used for demarcating specific vibrational qualities in a location, and also they would build sacred structures directly on the earth lines. The earth lines could be used either for placing the walls of the building on or the central axis of the building. And so this woodblock print shows in medieval times the dowsers of that time, vibrationally testing for where the lines of energy are running in the earth to plan out the city. In Dr. Karim's biogeometry work, a tremendous amount of detail has been developed, talking about the ways that we can detect these earth energy lines and the methods used in ancient times that have now been updated into modern methods to be able to build and work with these earth energies in the classical method of either developing a single building or actually shaping the energetics of entire neighborhoods, communities, or cities. This particular slide here looks at the way that in placing any type of sacred site, which in modern times would be a church in Europe, they would find a place that multiple energy lines come together that are running a specific type of energy. Again, this is an energy often referred to as the energy of sacred power spots. And one of Dr. Karim's accomplishments, as we'll mention in just a moment, has been to actually identify the specific vibrational quality of power spots. In this particular German analysis of this particular church, you can see that there are multiple lines of energy that are crossing at a particular location. The place of the multiple crossings of lines of energy is where they will place the altar within the church. And another major large energy line will become the central axis for the church.
And when we look at Giza, we find that even Graham Hancock noted this in his 1998 book, Heaven's Mirror. he developed a theory of longitudinal distribution of sacred sites based upon precessional numbers. These are numbers that are encoded into the precession of the equinox, 25,980-year cycle. And these are all harmonic numbers, such as 72, 144, 108, etc. But he also found not only did that the sites were related longitudinally from Giza, they all were harmonic distances, harmonic degrees apart. We also accidentally found that they were based upon pentagonal geometry. The numbers of precession are the internal angles of pentagons, suggesting that the precession of the equinoxes is directly related to sacred geometry, i.e. pentagons, and possibly dodecahedral geometries, which we'll see later. So was this a lost universal pattern yet to be discovered? And just to look at it from another level, the importance of the Great Pyramid itself. It appears to have been designed and built to represent the Earth, or certainly the Northern Hemisphere. The height and perimeter of the Great Pyramid multiplied by 43,200, which is one of these precessional numbers, yields figures very close to the modern polar radius and equatorial circumference. The base length of the pyramid is also precisely 1/8 of a minute of degree of the Earth's polar circumference. And so we're finding Earth measurements very simply, in very simple terms, within the Great Pyramid's dimensions. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really, because if you look more deeply into the Great Pyramid, you kind of see that it is really a repository of ancient knowledge, a repository of ancient mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and very high wisdom. And I believe it was partly maintained and partly built to be a permanent structure to encode all these different high levels of geometry, mathematics, and technologies and energies and so forth. And it was almost deliberately created to withstand many thousands of years of vandalism, destruction, and ignorance, to maintain this high level of intelligence, sophistication, and consciousness on the planet. I think the same can be said for many other sites around the world, and that's why they were built with earth and stone, so they would last and be almost impossible to destroy. And the Great Pyramid itself in Egypt, brilliant research by various people, mainly Christopher Dunn, found that they themselves, the pyramids, were crazy energy accumulators and distributors, mechanical, thermal, electric, magnetic, nuclear, and even chemical. There was so much going on within these. And there was a whole system that Chris Dunn writes about in the Giza power plant, where they were able to set them up, get the pyramids going, seal them up, and there would be like this constant energy flow, energy machine that could have fed the whole planet. It could have been manipulated so it spread from one ancient site to another, and spread constantly around the planet between obelisks, standing stones, mounds, and other such things, even on different continents. But right underneath the pyramid is the great subterranean chamber. I've been here a couple of times, but I went here when I was extremely sick. When I was here, I was actually inside the pyramid on December the 21st, 2012, of all times. And I was so sick, I got really horrendous food poisoning. When I climbed down to the subterranean chamber, I became completely healed, 100%. I was not sick. 30 minutes while I was down there, I was completely healthy. The whole sickness had been neutralized. I was no longer nauseous. I felt energized. I thought, what is going on here? This is utterly bizarre. I came back out the chamber, and I was sick again. I got up to the surface, and I felt sick again. So it's almost like some kind of neutralizing energy, like the pyramid power was kind of sending this energy down into this subterranean chamber. And I was completely well for the time I was there. And we know that pyramids do have these particular effects. There's been tests done recently in Russia and Ukraine. And they've been building these fiberglass pyramids, which are based upon the golden section, much like the Great Pyramid, although these are much more taller and elongated. And these are some of the results they were getting. They would find that water wouldn't freeze, increased strength of concrete, ionized plasma rising up above the pyramid. Seeds, again, were getting the 20 to 100% growth increase. increased resistance to mice with salmonella and tumor. Similar to me, I had like serious food poisoning. I just, I got completely well when I was under the Great Pyramid, and increases in yield and so forth. And so we're finding that even just a simple pyramid construction does have these incredible effects. I think that principle was applied everywhere on the planet. This is a quote from Paul Devereaux, who basically says the same thing, that ancient sites of power were sometimes found and sometimes deliberately constructed to mimic or enhance what could be found in nature. In either case, the forces of the natural world were used. They were used for a variety of purposes, such as the promotion of fertility and for healing, but the overriding purpose was the need to have gateways through which contact with spirit could be achieved. In the ancient world, there were certain people who knew how to work with the physical world in order to create access to the spiritual. So there's like a combination of different things at play here. The same principles that would enhance your seeds and grains, this has been tested scientifically, would enhance your brain chemistry and affect your different glands in your brain and give you out-of-body and visionary experiences.
would have exactly the length of the sacred cubit as its length of arc. And if I swung a pendulum from that, and I swung it at 30 degrees, it would take exactly 1 second for the plumb bob or the pendulum to swing each direction. So the meter and the cubit, all of these systems of measurement we use are all fundamental to how the Great Pyramid was built. In fact, if you look at it, the Great Pyramid happens to be on a latitude of 29.9792458 exactly light speed. That's exactly the degree for its latitude position. And it's the identical number. If you don't believe me, just Google it. You'll find it. Just Google it, light speed versus the latitude of the Great Pyramid. But a lot of people don't know that even the longitude is actually relational to light speed, because it ends up at 31.1342 degrees. And if I take that 31.1342 and divide it into 36 or 360 degrees, just move the decimal position 1 over, that ends up being 0.864 of 360 degrees. And that's why we have 86,400 seconds in 1 day. So both the latitude and the longitude are light speed measures. One is in meters, the other is in miles. Just simply by taking the one off the front, of light speed. So phi ends up as a positional reference point. And you could think of it as the math constants themselves aren't actually all these separate things, just as we perceive ourselves as totally separate from each other. Yet in mathematics, we teach it as a constant. Now, people memorize pi. They memorize pi to how many digits? Thousands, tens of thousands of digits. People actually take the time to memorize pi to tens of thousands of digits because we think that pi, in its transcendental irrationalness, is so special, it's so unique. And yet, is it really? Or is it just a mirror reflection of how we look at the number 1? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because even 360 degrees is really just one turn of one circle. So we have these fundamental math constants. Now, what if there was a relationship between these fundamental math constants and music? Okay, so I started looking at it and noticed that pi itself, there's a language here, right? And you have to look at this like a pure linguistic perspective, to really dive into it. You would look at it and say, all right, I'm going to separate this out and say, what if the 3 in 3.14 was actually just 3 turns of a circle? So 1, 2, 3, brings me back to the top. And then the 1, 4 would land right here, which would land me right at 51 degrees, right along this circle. Everyone follow me so far? So it's the 0.14 that really matters the most, right? Because that's the positional point that I'm going to land on. Then the next thing would be double that, which would take me to 86, right? 51 takes me to 102 degrees. So it would basically be this position right here, which would be 0.28, right? So 0.14 times 2, 0.28. And that happens to be a position called tau. So tau is 2 pi. So 3.14 would become 6.28. But the 6, again, is just 6 turns of the circle. Okay? Then the next position would land me right here, where I have this f. And this is what we call rho. And that is a mathematical constant as well. Then we have another one here called gamma, which is the Euler-Mascheroni number. Then we have Euler, and we have light speed here. So this would be 0.86 approximately. So now we have actually all the notes, the whole notes in a scale, starting with D, E, F, G, A, B, then back to C. So it's basically going 1/7. How many notes are there on a scale? Whole notes, they'd be 7, right? 7, the 8th would begin the next scale. And actually, each of these positions is pi, another math constant called tau, another math constant called rho, another one called the Euler-Mascheroni number, which ends up being exactly 0.577, another one, which is 0.718, which is that Euler number from the 2.718, because remember, it's just 2 turns of the circle. Landing at the 0.718 is what matters the most. And then light speed coming up here at 0.86, which would be 6 divided by 7. So 1/7, 2/7, 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7. Now, the Euler number plays this other role where it actually gives you the half note positions, because we know we have a chromatic scale, right? We have sharps and flats in our scale. And Euler is the 2.718. Well, if I take 0.71, I multiply that by 2, I end up with 0.14 with a fraction behind it. So the Euler is always working in combination with pi itself. And in fact, if you do this, you can write this down if you like. The Euler number controls compound interest. So if I borrowed, or if I loaned you $100,000, and you're paying me 6% interest, we have this thing called the law of 72, where I can do simple math to figure this out, how long it's going to take for me to double my investment in you. So all I do is I just take the interest rate that you're paying, and I then put that into 72 to see how many times it goes into 72. So if you're paying me 6% interest, how long will it take me to double my money? How many times does 6 go into 72? 12 times, right? So 12 years for me to double my money. And this takes into consideration compound interest. This is what banks do when they basically calculate your interest. This is the maximum exponential growth, 12 times 12 years. So 12 years for me to double my money. And this takes into consideration compound interest. This is what banks do when they basically calculate your interest. This is what banks do when they basically calculate your interest. This is the maximum exponential growth, 12 times 12 years. that can come out of this investment, right? Now, the 72 is related to that 718, right? It's just rounded to 72. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you take Euler number, which is 2.718, and this is where that 72 comes from, the 0.72, and we take 2.718 and we multiply that by 1/3, so 0.333333, and then put 4 on the end of it. And then you take 3.14 and you multiply that by 2/3, so 0.66666667 at the end of it. And then add those two numbers together, guess what you get? Not quite. So I'm taking a weighted average, right? So it's basically 2.718. I'll draw it out for you. So 2.718, 2818 times 1/3, right? Plus 3.1415926 times 2/3 equals, anyone know? It's called a weighted average. 3.000. So Euler and pi actually work together to create light and darkness. And this is fundamentally embedded right in the Great Pyramid, and it can't be missed. And they're actually just creating musical notes because everything we experience in mathematics and in the universe is actually just this beautiful symphony playing all around us all the time. So numbers of the alphabet, constants, mathematical constants like Euler and pi and phi, the golden mean, and alpha, and all these other math constants that we hear about are the verbs of expression of this language. And circles in geometry organize the sentences, the syntax of this language. So imagine that we've kind of been playing with mathematics in the same way that, let's say you had learned, so the Korean language, I speak Korean. I lived in Korea for 2 years. And the Korean language is a totally phonetic language, right? So it's called Hangul. And you may have seen the symbols. You go to a Korean restaurant or something like that. They're kind of very basic and simple looking. They don't look difficult like the Chinese characters do. Chinese characters have a lot more detail in them, right? But what if I told you that the entire Korean language is based on Chinese? So the root, just like English has the root sort of words that all come from Latin, right? The root of Korean language is actually Chinese characters. And they use the Chinese characters in Korea, just nobody teaches them that much anymore, right? But in order to read a newspaper in Korea, you need to be able to understand and know at least 2,000 Chinese characters, because they do use them every once in a while. They're getting less and less so the case. But imagine that you'd only learn the phonetic pronunciations for these Chinese characters, right? And you never knew the true meaning of the actual Chinese character, like the hieroglyphic demonstration of that. But you just simply could speak the language. We've been doing the exact same thing with mathematics. We're missing the message, completely missing the message. There's an entire language that speaks to us very clearly and succinctly and beautifully and simply if we actually take the time to understand what's underlying that language. And we're not right now. That's the thing that's really unfortunate about the world so far. But the good news is that we're all about to get to a stage where we can understand this new language of mathematics, because this is the means through which consciousness speaks to us, speaks to each of us. Consciousness is writ with each of these messages of this number. And I'm sure many of us here have experienced a change in how we communicate or how numbers seem to communicate to us. Have you noticed that? Absolutely. So this is the sun. Now, is it pure coincidence? Now, if I had a perfect means to be able to come up with a time system, would it not somehow relate to the sun? Right? If I had the perfect ability to do it. Now, when did the number 86,400, when was that chosen as the number of seconds in our day? And if you just take 24 and multiply it by 60, right? So 24 times 60 minutes times 60 seconds equals 86,400. There's even a song about this. I think Matchbox 20. I can't remember what the name of the band is that does it. But there's even a song about this, 86,400 seconds in a day. Now, do you think it's coincidence that the Sumerians, who came up with this time system, it's as old as our own history, right, of civilization, knew that the sun is exactly 10 times that? Is that just coincidence? By the way, it's that same 0.864 times 360 degrees that gives us the longitude of the Great Pyramid too. Is that just coincidence? I don't know. And then what about the distance from Earth to the sun? 93 million miles. If I double that to try to find what would be the exact sort of diameter of the orbital, what would that come out to be? 186. Is that back to light speed again? And how fast does the Earth travel around the sun? How fast is our orbital velocity? Anyone know? Would you be surprised if I told you it was 18.6 miles per second? So the Earth is traveling around the sun at precisely 10,000 times slower than light speed. Wouldn't that be interesting to kind of know? And what about the distance of Mercury to the sun? It's 36 million miles. But if I multiply 36 million times the precessional number of 2.592, I end up with 93 million miles. That gives us exactly the orbital position for the Earth. And I can do the same thing with 186 million. I multiply that by 2.592. I'm at 483 now. 483 million is the distance to Jupiter from the sun. These are all harmonic ratios. And why 2.592? Because it's 1.61, again, phi squared. So 1.61 squared is 2.592. Isn't that interesting? So we have all of this, and these are just my hand drawings when I started doing this work. We have all these relationships that point to incredible order. And even the planets themselves, have you ever noticed if you took water off the surface of the Earth, what color would the Earth be? Probably the color of dirt, which is kind of like a brownish, reddish type of color. Well, if that's the case, then isn't this just a rainbow? Roy G. Biv? And then each has its own note. And by the way, I'm not the first to say this. Kepler said this. Harmony of the spheres. So did Isaac Newton. They all believed that there was a music and there was a geometry. Kepler's laws of motion also defines why light speed would have a big interaction here. But then you have to ask, well, then how did we know that the measurement systems would all be perfect? That's a deeper question. So here we go. There's another example. 86,400 seconds in a day. But look at the mean diameter of Jupiter, 86,400. And look at the mean diameter of the sun, 864,000 miles. The orbital speed of the moon is 86,400 kilometers per day. And you've got 864,000 kilometers per day for the orbital speed of Saturn. Now, is this all coincidental? And yet we ended up exactly with 86,400 seconds in a day. I tell you what, the people that came up with our time system were absolute genius. I mean, that is incredible. Or maybe is it just writ in the fabric of consciousness? And all of these are harmonic ratios, right? Every single one of these. And notice you'll take 3 cubed and then 2 to all its powers, and you end up with these numbers, 54, 108, 216, right? 432. By the way, 432 squared is the speed of light in miles per second. And so you'll see these numbers over and over and over again. You see 216, right, minutes in a 360-degree compass. 2,160 are the sum of interior angles of a cube. 2,160 miles is the diameter of the moon. Look at all of this order. It's astounding. So we have an ordering system as well around the number 24. Now, are there 25,920 years in precession, or is it 24,000? I believe it averages out at 24,000 because as we get closer to Sirius A, things speed up. And as things speed up, I believe our average in that point in time ends up going down to 21,600, which is related to that moon cycle, okay? And as we get farther away, it sort of slows down and goes to 25,920. Now, if we average 21,600 plus, right, do a weighted average, just like we did up there, plus 21,600 and 25,920, then you end up with an average right at 24,000. And that's probably what it is. Now, what's the magic of 24? Well, Fibonacci numbers end up, if you look at them in digital root, and digital root is just a simple mathematical technique. You take a number like 27, its digital root equals 9 because 2 plus 7 equals 9, right? So if I had a digital root of, you know, for the number 13, what would it be? 1 plus 3 equals 4, right? And all you have to do is keep going. This is kind of the same math that you do in numerology, same type thing, but nobody ever wants to look at it in academic circles because they call it numerology. Well, but guess what? Number theorists use this all the time to find and identify patterns. And Fibonacci numbers do this over here. So I mentioned that Fibonacci numbers are 1, 1, 2, so 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, then 8, then 13, because 1 plus 3 equals 4. Then it goes to 21, 2 plus 1 equals 3. Then it goes to 34, 3 plus 4 equals 7. Then 55, 5 plus 5 equals 1. You always reduce it down to one digit. Now, what's interesting that comes out of this is this pattern repeats itself every 24 numbers. So the Fibonacci pattern repeats every 24 numbers. And not only that, but actually the 180-degree opposites always sum to the number 9. 1 plus 8 equals 9, 1 plus 8 equals 9, 2 plus 7 equals 9, 3 plus 6 equals 9, 4 plus 5 equals 9, 8 plus 1. It just comes to 9 all around. And what's interesting is that if you look at all polygonal geometry, the sum of interior angles will always sum to 9. So 360 degrees, 180 degrees is a triangle, right? Triangle. So what's a square? 360. Okay. What's a pentagon? 540. 5 plus 4 equals 9. What's a hexagon? 720. 7 plus 2 equals 9. Right. What is a heptagon? 900. If you guys know that, then I would give you a prize probably. 900 degrees, and that adds up to 9, of course. Then an octagon is 1080, which adds up to 9. All right. Then you got 1260, still adds up to 9. Then you have 1440, still adds up to 9. Every polygonal geometry and all polyhedra will always sum to the number 9. So also another thing that I noticed was that all prime squared numbers always end up as a multiple of the number 24 plus 1, without exception, if you're going larger than the number 3. So 5 times 5 is 25. That's 1 times 24 plus 1, right? 7 times 7 is what? 49. That's 2 times 24 plus 1. Okay, what's the next one? 11 times 11, we're only looking at prime numbers, right? So 121, that's 5 times 24 plus 1. So what's the next one? 13 times 13? 169, right? That's 7 times 24 plus 1. And you can take this all the way out into infinity, and all prime numbers then end up always being multiples of the number 24. And interestingly, 24 is a special number. It's special for many reasons, but the first of which is that 24 has a reciprocal value. That means 1 over 24. That's how you find the reciprocal value, equals 0.41666. So it actually rounds to 0.42. So the reciprocal is equal to its palindrome. Palindrome means you just take the number and make it turn around backwards, right? So 24 has a palindrome that is 42. So its palindrome and its reciprocal value are the same. Interesting. Of course, you have a decimal position there, but the universe doesn't really care about decimal. Decimal is something that we use as a reference point for where we are. The universe doesn't care so much about it. So what's interesting then is you've got on the flower of life 24 circles on the outer perimeter. Also fascinating. The full flower of life. And then also another thing that I discovered is the square root of 10, which is another way of looking at another root of 1. The square root of 10 divided by 10 plus 1, it's a very simple equation, to the power of 1 over 0.24 gives me pi. So 24 has this relationship to pi and circles, again, too. And then also in reciprocal value, the only number that has 1,000 digits for its period length, if you just put 1 on top of it, is 24,001. Another interesting thing. So 24 is also 4 times 3 times 2 equals 24. And 2 plus 4 equals 6. So the Sumerians came up with the sexagesimal counting system. That's why we have, you know, all of the counting systems that we have even for our imperial units of measure as well, which, by the way, are even more advanced than our decimal systems because it's based on a base 12 system. So the way they would count was based on their knuckles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? That's how they would count. They would use the other hand to sort of track how many of those that they basically added up. So 24 is definitely special. So I then started doing some work on this, and I published a paper. Now, one of the hardest problems that's been around for a long time has been the world's inability to predict prime numbers. Has anyone known that you can actually predict prime numbers now? It's possible now. So I learned in junior high, impossible to predict a prime number, right? How many of you heard that when you were in school? Impossible to predict prime numbers. We don't know what they are. Well, actually, I published a paper in the same Cornell University site that you saw earlier in Walter's presentation, Accurate and Infinite Prime Prediction from Novel Quasi-Prime Analytical Methodology. So I went and spent 3 nights in the Great Pyramid. The next week, after I had spent 2 nights and 1 night totally by myself, I ended up publishing the precursor to this paper. And basically, this was the work that I did. And what I was looking for was a connection, working with Nassim Haramein, on is there a tie between electricity and gravity? Is there a tie between electromagnetism, radiation, and gravity? Now, Walter Russell has talked about this. Many people throughout history have talked about there must be some connection between the two, but it's been something that's confounded mankind for a long time. So what I was looking for was a number theory approach to understanding how gravity and electromagnetism might actually be interrelated with each other. And maybe there's only one force in the universe, and that's electricity, and the other forces that come off of it are just results of that electrical interaction. So what I found was that on a 24 clock, which is just a spiral of 24, starting here, then going around 24, then 48, then 72, then 96, etc., all prime numbers, which is this reddish-orange color, showed up, except for 2 and 3, in the exact same spokes of the wheel. And it's shaped just like a Templar cross. Now, in addition to that, what I was really interested to find were the numbers at the center of the cross, which turned out to be all the mathematical constants and their positional reference points versus 360 degrees and 432 degrees, which relates to pentagon and hexagon merger, 6 over 5 and 5 over 6 relationship. So for example, 222 shows up right here because 222 divided by 360 is 0.618. It doesn't give you the perfect irrational values, it just tells you where to find those irrational numbers that are in the same very close proximity, because this has no decimals on them, right? These are all just whole numbers as you go around, but it's beautifully ordered. So what I was interested in to understand is that what are the green numbers here? And how do the green numbers work? And what I found was that maybe there would be something that would indicate that it was similar to a prime number, but not necessarily prime. And there's a reason why it wasn't prime, but still there's a reason why it was adjacent to a prime in the same spoke. And it turns out that all the green numbers were divisible only by prime numbers greater than the number 3. So interesting. So every number in this spoke and that spoke and this one and this one and this one and this one, this one, this one is actually prime related without exception. So I took this to Chapman University CEO, who we had lunch together. His name is Daniele Strupa, and he's a good friend of mine. I gave the commencement speech at Chapman. I was previously on the board of Chapman for a few years, and I gave their commencement speech for their 150th commencement in 2011. And he had heard from a mutual friend that had seen me while I was in Israel sitting next to him on a bus doing this prime pattern. And so Daniele is a famous mathematician, and so he called me. He said, Robert, he's Italian also. He says, I understand you have a prime pattern. I said, well, I have something, you know. He says, can you show it to me? I said, yeah, sure. So we met for lunch. He was eating this stringy roast beef sandwich, and he's not a small man. And I showed him the pattern, and I said, what do you think? And he goes, I said, Daniele, are you okay? And he's like, so I jumped around the table and I did the Heimlich on him. And it didn't work the first time. I'm like, you got to pick him up, really. And so I had to do the Heimlich on him twice, and then he spits out his stringy roast beef. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Are you okay? And he says, back to the primes, back to the primes. And so we end up finishing the conversation. He says, you have to publish this now. You have to publish this now. And he actually, I said, can you help me write the proof so that it can pass muster with the other mathematicians? Because I hear these guys are not that nice. So he writes back that after. He says, here's the proof, here's the proof. And so I ended up publishing it. And so what we found was that if you can generate the quasi-primes, then you can basically find and predict all prime numbers. Because we can now create what's called an exclusion criteria, which means that it's kind of like this. I guess the best analogy I could think of is that, let's say we really want to understand matter. And so we all spend our time trying to understand what is the nature of matter. Why is carbon the way that carbon is, right? But maybe the answer is not in looking at the carbon. Maybe the answer is understanding the space around the carbon. So by analogy, I did the exact same thing. I figured out how to calculate and create a list of all of the green numbers. I don't have to look at any of the other numbers outside of that, which the sieve of Eratosthenes requires you to do. The way that it's been traditionally done to find primality is to calculate all numbers, multiply them all, and then take out the ones divisible by 2, take out the ones divisible by 3, take out the ones divisible by 5 and 7, and then what's left, right, you can say would be prime, okay? Now I don't need to do that. So I can take out 2/3 of all of the event horizon of space, and I can find that just by placing them on this chart. Very simple spiral. And interestingly, no one had ever seen it before. No one had ever done it that way before. Now the primes being on a chart like this was first written about by Peter Plichta. But I think this is much, much older. Much older. You can go back and see that Templar cross design on stela in Sumeria. And it's all over Egypt. And it's embedded within the flower of life. In fact, you could say the Templar cross is probably an abbreviation for the flower of life. So how would you do this then? It's as simple as this. You simply take the numbers in those spokes on the x-axis and y-axis, you multiply them by each other, and the ones that show up in this body of the table, and of course these would all be the squares, right, would by definition be quasi-prime. That means they're divisible by prime, but they're not.
Science is beginning to understand. Modern science has now established that the calcite structures on the pineal gland contain piezoelectric properties. This, in simple terms, means when pressure is applied to these structures, they produce an electrical charge.
If you have a little lighter and you hit the lighter and then you get that little spark that comes out, that's from a crystal being compressed.
This property makes it an antenna of sorts for our brain to receive signals and adapt energy. Another property of these crystals is to act like a transducer, which means they can convert the energy received into another form. In its regular work form, the pineal gland receives the energies from our senses and transfers them into signals to our brain, guiding it to react accordingly. But once activated properly, it holds the power to connect with the energies of the universe around us. It can become the gateway between the earthly and the divine. The piezoelectric effect works with the tiny crystals surrounding the pineal gland surface through the push of energy.
Piezochromatism. Piezochromatic crystals are crystals that can release any color of light in the rainbow.
In yogic practices, this effect is achieved through breathing and focus exercises that release the cerebrospinal fluid, which is pushed against your pineal gland, the seventh chakra, and the third eye, which results in the release of an electrical charge. This release of charge expands the calcite crystals around the pineal gland to their limit, and then brings them back to their original size. This continuous cycle results in a constant electromagnetic field within our brains. This release and contraction of the electromagnetic field creates a pulsating effect within our mind and body, bringing us one step closer to unleashing our energies. Now operating within this pulsating electromagnetic field, the pineal gland releases upgraded metabolites of melatonin into the brain. As the pineal gland becomes more activated, the higher frequency energy produced in your brain conjoins all your 7 energies and translates them to your brain with vivid imagery. It is when with time you reach this higher state of frequencies your pineal gland naturally starts to produce melatonin metabolites called benzodiazepines. These chemicals make your brain calmer, more aware, and at peace in all situations. It's important to note here that benzodiazepines are the same class of drugs that are used in antidepressants and
of anything that we construct to have people living in, any cities, should be designed to support life. We don't need cities that are designed the way they are, that are designed to run economically and that are based on profit. Medical systems that are based on profit, energy. This may sound preposterous to a lot of people, but these pipe organs in these cities and these small towns, it seems like every town has one as well. I've even got reports from little villages in Mexico that don't have very much there. They've got dirt roads and all sorts of stuff, but there'll be a church in the town which has a huge pipe organ. They don't really know where it came from, but it's there. And the question is, what was the real purpose of these instruments?
It started with the Italians in what's called polyphonic music. They learned how to play 2 or more notes simultaneously. That started in about the 1500s. An Italian priest named Antonio Vivaldi was the one that really pushed all before, but all of the Italian musicians, particularly Frescobaldi and Gabrielli, are 2 of them that developed the initial polyphonic music. All comes from Pythagoras. The only pieces of it remain. It's called major and minor. Well, those are all part of what are called church modes. You feel this stuff moving through your body like you're invisible.
Were they merely for creating music, or was it really a sound healing system that they had? And Royal Raymond Rife was a man who found a way to cure all diseases way back in the 20s or 30s
I think it was in the 1930s or the 1940s, they actually had a banquet to celebrate the end of all disease due to the research and techniques that had been uncovered by Royal Roman Rife, and he was curing incurable diseases, and he did it through sound frequency. He was able to identify viruses, live viruses in the body. He could view them with this microscope that he built. The Rife microscope was an absolutely incredible device which gave him the ability to be able to view viruses in real time. And what he would do, he would put a blood sample under the microscope and he would look at your blood sample and he would subject the sample to a series of light frequencies. Because every light you apply, when you go through frequencies of light and you put them on an object, different frequencies of light will illuminate different aspects of the object. Like if you put frequencies of light on a blood slide, different organisms or viruses or bacteria in the blood will become illuminated under certain lights. And Rife figured out that all you have to do is go through the light frequency until you find the light that illuminates the virus, and then find the corresponding sound frequency, bombard the virus with that sound frequency, and it will shatter like a crystal glass shatters on high C. All you have to do is find the corresponding sound frequency, and you will create a feedback loop which will shatter the virus. And that's what Royal Rife figured out. So when you look at that, and you think of these organs and the sound that they produce and the healing that comes from sound. I mean, any people who've gone to sound healings know what I'm talking about. And sound healings may sound incredibly new age and airy-fairy to most people, but they do, in fact, work. And I find all of this sort of stuff quite intriguing and quite fascinating. And the concept that we had this ancient technology is really not so far-fetched. And when you think about it and you really consider the possibility that this technology has been stolen from us, it really does provide a whole new perspective to look at things from.
Or a stringed instrument with organ's first digital device. It's an analog computer, but it's a digital keyboard. So now you're stuck to discrete frequencies.
And now we have substantive evidence, massive amounts of evidence, that ultimately what has happened with this planet is that we are in dissonance to another note, another frequency. It turned out that when we discovered the original musical scale, there was not just 6, but a total of 9 core creative frequencies to the universe. That is, everything in the universe is made from 9 notes, only 9. And that the first 6 are the solfeggio, and then there's 3 additional ones that form a perfect circle of sound. So the first 6 notes, 396, 417, 528, 639, 741, 852, was the original solfeggio scale. The 528 that you can see on my left in green is the color green. It's the heart of the rainbow. That's the miracle note from the original solfeggio note, from the original solfeggio scale. And the other note that you see, 741, which is part of nature, is called the devil's interval in musicology. That when you play 741 with 528, it creates such an annoying and dissonant energy, diseasing, stressful, that if you continue to listen to it, you could die. And so the concept here is interesting. In the world today, we have people who are controlling virtually everything economically, geopolitically. Their agenda has been population manipulation, population control for millennia.
And you think about these huge pipe organs in these churches, folks. Who built these things? I mean, these things are amazing, the construction of them. Some of them are absolutely huge. Who figured out the frequencies and who got it all that perfect? Who tuned it? And imagine the sound field that it would set up if you went through the entire keyboard and you created that level of sound. I mean, these things are incredibly loud. You could literally cover the entire village in a sound frequency. What if people went to these church buildings and actually sat in the organ music, and the organ music healed them of all the bacteria in their body every week when they went to these churches? Perhaps the churches were not places of worship, perhaps they were places of healing. Just a thought. Look at the detail of these organs. Look at the detail that went into the construction of them, the meticulous workmanship of them. Look at the detail that went into the construction of a lot of these buildings. A lot of these buildings look more like machines than actual buildings. They look like they're buildings that actually perform a function, which isn't just an aesthetic function of looking good or being a place to pray in,
they very much look like they are able to accumulate and harness and use energy in a way that we are unaware of. Anybody who knows the human vessel and understands humanity understands the difference between analog and digital and how it affects us on an emotional and on an energetic level.
They have held the secret knowledge, the ancient music, by which the pyramids were constructed based on the math. All of the universe is constructed according to these 9 tones. They knew about them. In fact, they instituted. In fact, it was the Rockefeller Foundation in 1939 that instituted the world's standard tuning. The Western world tunes to a 440 hertz frequency. That when you tune your instrument to that, the F sharp note is 741. Precisely. The A440 is what now is the standard tuning. If you go A439, you're closer to one of the creator's tones. If you go A441, you're closer to one of the creator's original tones. That's how precisely it has been manipulated. To do what? To shut down the 95% of your brain, particularly the right brain that operates the heart mind to the divine human community. When you go driving your car and your channel on the radio is tuned to a station and you're grooving to the music, you love that music. As you get farther and farther away from the broadcasting tower, that music gets static. You start to lose the signal from the clear channel, broadcast, and it gets staticky. When it gets staticky, you get a little annoyed. But you want to listen to it. You really have a heart for that music, so you continue to listen to it for another 10, 15 miles, and suddenly it becomes so annoying that you just get disgusted. You go, and you shut it off. And if you continue to listen to it, you get sick. That's what we're talking about here. Except you don't even know that you've been listening to the static your whole life. So in other words, the master composer, master conductor of the Universal Orchestra is singing love songs in 5/8, uplifting everything simultaneously. And we're the only species out of tune and accepting static. 93% of the function of DNA is light and sound reception and transmission. Photon, reception, transmission for intercellular communication and cellular upregulation. You know what cellular upregulation means? It means precipitation. And now, every millisecond, instant second, you're remanifesting right now in water. Water is the most energy conductive of all of the materials. It's a superconductor. Let me give you the fundamental, the rudimentary origin of the numbers. Here it is. The most important numbers, 3, 6s, and 9s. Again, Tesla, who created a Tesla coil. Tesla coils, energy amplifiers. Your DNA is an energy amplifier, a coil, operating by the 3, 6s, and 9s primarily. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you probably looked at engines or motors, magnets that have been wound with copper wire. When you do that, when you wind the copper, coil the copper around the magnet, it enhances the energy dramatically. That's what your DNA is. It's an antenna to the creator. Every single cell of your body has this energy capability. It has this divine intelligence. What does that mean? That means the first entities that you should be communing with in order to uplift yourself, sustain yourself, heal yourself, is the billions of cells in your body that have its own unique genetic intelligence, its own sacred spiral to the creator. And so this is the structure of the way that the universe operates, which is thus fabulous for us, our understanding of some of the most wonderful pieces of information to allow us to live a faithful life, a life according to the law, according to the matrix. Here is the simple way to analyze this. You've heard of what goes around comes around. You've heard of as you sow, so shall you reap. So this explains it. Let's say that you're here and you are putting out negative thoughts, negative behaviors, negative actions. It's all energy.
The neurology in your brain's powerful. 86% of you is God water.
I mean, it does. I mean, we're very much analog in everything we do. And even that is not the probably correct way to say it, but